The town of Red Willow sat where the prairie thinned into dust and wind, a place built from sun-bleached wood and hard opinions. In the late 1800s, survival shaped respect, and respect was given only to those who worked fast, spoke loud, and broke before nothing. Gentle souls were treated like cracked tools, kept if useful, mocked if not. It was into this world that the girl arrived, carrying a small bundle, a quiet heart, and a name no one bothered to say kindly. She had married into the Harrow Ranch not out of love but out of necessity. Her own family had faded with illness and debt, and the marriage promised shelter, food, and a place to belong. Yet belonging never came. From her first morning, the women of the house watched her hands shake as she tried to milk a restless cow. When the bucket tipped and white spilled into the dirt, laughter followed faster than sympathy. "City soft," one sister-in-law scoffed. "Useless," another added, sealing the word to her like a brand. Days blurred into chores she was never taught to do well. She burned bread, tangled reins, and moved slower than the sun demanded. Every mistake was counted, repeated, and retold at supper. The elders spoke of her as if she weren't there, as if she were a burden the ranch endured out of obligation. Even the children learned to point and whisper. She answered none of it. She lowered her eyes, folded her pain inward, and worked until her fingers cracked and bled. At night, when the house finally slept, she mended clothes by lamplight and hummed songs her mother once sang. The tune steadied her breathing. In those moments, she remembered who she had been before grief taught her to be small. She believed endurance was a virtue, that silence might earn mercy. The prairie outside her window seemed endless, and she wondered if a place existed where quiet was not mistaken for weakness. The cowboy first noticed her on a morning when frost clung to the fence rails. He was there on business for the ranch, a man known in Red Willow for his steady aim and steadier temper. He spoke little, rode well, and carried authority without raising his voice. As she struggled to lift a sack of feed too heavy for her frame, he paused. Others laughed. He did not. He set the sack down where she could manage it and walked on, as if nothing unusual had happened. After that she sensed him more than she saw him. A gate left unlatched when her hands were full. A horse watered before she thought to ask. Once when a plate shattered and the room erupted in blame, he met her eyes from across the room and shook his head, slow and firm, as if the cruelty itself offended him. It was a look of recognition, not pity, and it unsettled her more than the laughter. The Harrow's ridicule grew sharper with time. They measured worth in calluses and noise, and she offered neither. When she faltered, they smiled. When she succeeded, they ignored it. During a midday meal, one sister-in-law lifted her cup and declared, "Some folks are born to be carried." The table erupted. The girl stared at her hands and counted her breaths, willing herself not to disappear. Outside, the wind carried the smell of sage and promise. She found solace tending a skittish foal the others had given up on. The animal calmed under her touch, responding to patience instead of force. It followed her like a shadow, a small miracle no one noticed. In those quiet triumphs she felt a strength she could not name. The cowboy watched these things. He noticed how animals leaned toward her, how she listened before acting, how she absorbed blows without hardening. He had seen loud courage fail men on the trail. He knew another kind existed. Still, he said nothing. In Red Willow, words carried consequences, and he chose his carefully. One evening, a task meant to humiliate her went wrong. Sent alone to fetch water at dusk, she slipped and soaked her dress. Laughter rang from the porch as she returned shivering. "Useless," someone called again, louder this time, so the word could follow her into sleep. She changed by lamplight, hands trembling, pride in tatters. Outside, a horse snorted softly. The cowboy sat his saddle, waiting until she finished, then tipped his hat and rode off without a sound. She lay awake listening to the house breathe, the prairie sigh, and the ache in her chest settle into resolve. If she must endure, she would endure whole. Tomorrow would bring more laughter, more trials, more proof demanded from a soul already spent. And somewhere beyond the ridicule, a silence waited, one that would finally be broken. Before dawn, she rose and stepped outside, wrapping herself in borrowed wool. The sky bruised purple, then pale. She breathed in cold air and steadied herself, imagining a future not defined by mockery. She practiced gratitude for small mercies, a cup filled, a task finished, a kindness unspoken. Somewhere in that growing light she sensed eyes on the horizon, a presence that neither judged nor demanded. The thought did not save her, but it steadied her spine. As the ranch woke, boots thudded and voices sharpened. Orders came quick and careless. She answered with nods, setting herself to work again. If Red Willow insisted she was nothing, she would prove otherwise in ways that could not be stolen. Quiet was not absence. Patience was not surrender. And though no one yet claimed her worth, the prairie had room for truths that took time to be seen. The day began, harsh and ordinary, but something unseen had shifted. In the dust between laughter and labor, a story gathered itself, waiting for the moment when endurance would finally be named what it truly was: strength. That moment crept closer with every breath she chose to keep. The weeks that followed hardened the air around the Harrow Ranch, turning every chore into a test and every glance into judgment. The girl rose before dawn and worked until stars returned, yet her effort was measured only by what she failed to do. If a fence leaned, they blamed her. If a horse balked, they laughed. Cruelty had become routine, as common as dust on boots. The sisters-in-law sharpened their sport, assigning her the heaviest loads and the least instruction. They spoke sweetly to outsiders and viciously to her, ensuring no one questioned the jokes. At supper, stories of her mistakes were retold until even truth felt exaggerated. Once, during a community barn gathering, she was ordered to demonstrate roping she had never learned. Her hands fumbled, the rope coiled wrong, and laughter rolled like thunder. Faces she hoped might soften instead brightened with amusement. She bowed her head and apologized, though no apology could fill the hollow in her chest. From the edge of the crowd, the cowboy watched, jaw tight, eyes dark. He stepped forward once, then stopped, weighing silence against storm. He remembered lessons learned on the trail, how reckless words could burn bridges faster than fire. So he stayed still, though the choice tasted bitter. The girl's refuge became smaller moments snatched between insults. She fed the foal, brushed its mane, and whispered encouragement meant for herself. Animals trusted her calm, and that trust stitched her days together. Trouble arrived with a missing calf, discovered at dusk when tempers were already sharp. Accusations flew, and the finger turned to her without hesitation. She had been near the pasture, they said. She was slow, they said. Threats followed, spoken casually, about sending her away before winter. The word useless returned, louder, crueler, meant to end debate. She did not argue, but something inside her finally cracked. Tears came later, alone, pressed into borrowed wool. She prayed for strength that would not shame her. The cowboy found the calf before dawn, tangled in brush beyond the creek. He freed it, quiet and careful, then led it home. He said nothing at first, letting truth walk in on its own legs. By midday, the ranch buzzed with a gathering meant to settle the matter. Neighbors arrived, curious and hungry for spectacle. The girl stood apart, hands folded, ready to accept whatever came. Laughter sparked early, confidence fed by habit. Someone repeated the word again, savoring it. The cowboy stepped forward then, boots steady, voice still withheld. Silence crept outward as eyes turned. He looked at her once, a promise unspoken, and faced the crowd. What he would say had been carried a long way. The wind paused as if the prairie itself leaned closer. Her heart thudded, loud as hooves in her ears. Behind him, the missing calf bawled, living proof waiting to be named. Still, he did not rush. He had watched patience misunderstood before, and he knew timing could turn the tide. The girl lifted her chin, bracing for another cut. Around them, judgment waited, sharp and ready. The story had narrowed to a point. Whatever came next would change the shape of her days. She held herself still, refusing to beg. The cowboy drew a breath, steady as a held line. The crowd leaned in, unaware that laughter had reached its end. Somewhere inside her, hope stirred despite years of being told not to expect it. It frightened her almost as much as despair. Across the yard, the sisters-in-law exchanged confident looks. They believed the moment belonged to them. The elders cleared their throats, prepared to speak. No one noticed the way the cowboy's shadow fell across the girl's boots. That shadow felt like shelter, brief but real. She steadied her breathing and waited. The prairie hummed with insects and expectation, a future balanced on the edge of a sentence. The cowboy's gaze swept the circle, measuring faces, measuring courage. He had chosen his words, and he would not waste them. The girl felt the weight of every mile that had brought her here. She stood not small, simply quiet. The crowd shifted, impatience rising. Someone scoffed, ready to laugh again. That sound never came. The cowboy raised his hand, claiming the space. In that held breath, the girl sensed a door opening. Not escape, but recognition. She met his eyes again, courage borrowed from his calm. The world waited. Dust lifted as a breeze crossed the yard, erasing footprints. What remained would be spoken. The girl straightened her shoulders, ready to hear her fate named aloud. She did not look away. Across the circle, the cowboy finally opened his mouth. The sound of his voice had not yet formed, but its promise filled the space. Everything before this had been endurance. Everything after would be something else. The laughter that once ruled the yard felt suddenly thin. It wavered, unsure of itself. The girl inhaled, steady and deep. She was still standing. The moment stretched, fragile and electric. The storm had not yet broken, but the sky had changed. All eyes fixed on the cowboy. He drew breath again, and the section closed on that held silence. No one interrupted him now. Even the wind seemed to listen. For the girl, time slowed into clarity. Fear loosened its grip. She understood that whatever followed would be truth, and truth, once spoken, could not be laughed away. The prairie held its breath with her. So did the ranch. The cowboy's words hovered just beyond sound. A reckoning waited. This was the edge of laughter and the beginning of something braver. The girl stood ready to hear her worth named. The silence deepened, complete. Section 2 ended there, balanced on the promise of his voice. Nothing moved, yet everything had shifted. The next breath would change her life. She waited. The prairie, the people, and the past waited with her. Justice stood just beyond the coming words, and for once she was not alone anymore now. The cowboy's voice finally broke the silence, calm and steady, carrying farther than any shout. "You've laughed long enough," he said, eyes moving from face to face. The yard stilled. Even the calf quieted as if listening. "You call her useless," he continued, and the word fell flat, stripped of its power. "But she is the princess of my heart." A murmur rippled through the crowd, disbelief tangled with curiosity. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I've watched her work when no one praised her," he said. "I've seen her kindness when it earned her nothing. I've seen patience you mistake for weakness and strength you refuse to recognize." He gestured toward the pasture. "That foal follows her because she never struck it. The calf you accused her of losing stands here because she searched while others mocked. She endures your scorn without returning it. That is not useless. That is rare." Faces shifted. Some hardened, others softened. The sisters-in-law stared, mouths tight, their confidence faltering. The elders exchanged glances, hearing respect in his tone they could not dismiss. He turned to her then, and his expression gentled. "You don't owe them anything," he said, not loud but clear. "Not your tears, not your silence. You owe yourself the truth." She felt the words land, not like rescue but like recognition. Her hands trembled, then steadied. For the first time, she lifted her chin without fear. Tears came, quiet and unashamed, slipping free of years of restraint. The cowboy faced the crowd again. "I won't stand by while cruelty wears the mask of tradition," he said. "If you measure worth by noise, you'll miss what matters. I choose differently." The yard held its breath. Then a neighbor cleared his throat. Another nodded. The laughter that once ruled the place had vanished, replaced by an uncomfortable stillness. The word useless found no purchase now. The elders spoke at last, voices careful. Apologies came, awkward and incomplete, but offered. The sisters-in-law said nothing. They did not need to. Their silence was answer enough. The cowboy stepped back and offered her a choice with an open hand. "Come with me," he said simply. "Not to be saved. To stand beside me." She looked at the house where she had learned endurance the hard way, then at the prairie, wide and honest. She took his hand. The gesture was small, but it echoed. They left together as the sun dipped, not hurried, not triumphant, just sure. Behind them, Red Willow watched, changed by witnessing dignity claimed. Days later, they built a life measured in patience and shared labor. He taught without condescension. She learned without fear. Her confidence grew like grass after rain, quiet and unstoppable. She laughed then, softly at first, discovering joy without permission. He listened. The prairie opened to them and they met it as equals. At sunset, she stood on the rise and watched the light settle, knowing her worth at last. The cowboy stood beside her, a steady presence, and the world felt right. Their story spread, not as spectacle but as reminder. Quiet strength endures. Love speaks when it must. And a princess needs no crown to be seen. Together they faced the horizon, and the wind carried their peace forward, far beyond laughter, into tomorrow.